everyone. Welcome to Academics of Public Administration. I am here with Mary Feeney, professor and Lincoln Professor of Ethics and Public Affairs at Arizona State University. I will not read all of her many credentials, including editor of the Journal of Public Administration Research and Theory and fellow at the National Academy of Public Administration, because I'm sure many of you know exactly who I'm talking to. And I'm thrilled to be having this conversation. Hi, Mary.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me today.
How's the weather in Arizona?
It's hot and getting hotter, but it's still that time of year where we get a little cool morning. So I'm getting up early and enjoying the cool weather while we still have it.
Very good. Well, thrilled to be able to talk to you today and learn more about your career and your contributions to the field of public administrations. Thank you. I want to start by talking about how you became interested in public administration and your trajectory in that field.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I suppose when I think about it, I feel like I just kind of fell into it. I didn't set out to study public administration. I suppose I didn't really set out to study anything. I grew up in a really big family from Casper, Wyoming. And my mom had a high school diploma when my dad left, and she had to put herself through the local community college and got an associate's degree when I was 12 years old. And I just remember thinking, that's not going to happen to me. I'm going to college. And at a very young age, I knew I wanted to get out of town and that college was the way to do it. And I was pretty fixated on that. And I was a good student, but I think became kind of obsessive about being as good of a student, like being the best so I could get out of town. And I did. I went overseas in high school. I studied in South Africa. I got a scholarship and went there and came home. And I really thought I was going to study like development, like political development was what I was very interested in sort of early on. And I went to university at the University of Wyoming, had a scholarship there, and was sort of like disappointed I didn't get to go further away from my hometown. And so I spent most of my time at the University of Wyoming trying to get out of Wyoming. And so I went to college and I got that big book of classes. And I remember sitting with my friend from high school, and we just like flipped through that book and we're like, this class sounds cool. And I just took every class that sounded cool to me. And I was taking non-Western politics and non-Western religion and post-Cold War politics. And I found if you sign up for the higher level graduate courses, they're really small and you get to talk a lot and read like cooler books. So I ended up just sort of in small graduate seminars as an undergrad. So I had a lot of interaction with really cool faculty in history and English and political science. And I would just kind of talk to them about what I was going to do. And I spent a lot of time trying to leave the university. So I had a political science professor who was like, you should go do an internship in DC. And I was like, I'm interested in studying politics. I'm not interested in doing politics. He was like, just go. And so I did. And I became very certain I didn't want to go into politics and came back to Wyoming and was like, yeah, that's not for me. And then I did, field camps, environmental field camps where I would get credit to go count cranes out on the Platte River and stuff like that. So I just kind of looked for everything the university would let me do that paid me to go somewhere else. And I explored all sorts of different things. My senior year, I applied because I still thought I wanted to do development. So I started taking courses in like human geography. And I thought, I'm going to do that. And so the person who wrote my textbook was at Minnesota. So I applied to go to Minnesota, and I applied to go to Howard because I wanted to study African politics. And I got this scholarship to go for a year to Minnesota. And I went and I did that. And I took courses in, African literature and Japanese literature. I just took tons of classes about development and colonialism and stuff. And the more I studied that stuff, the more I thought, well, I can't be an expert on a place I'm not from. and I had all these kind of white American teachers who were experts on maybe Botswana, but they'd only go there for like a month of the year. And I thought, well, that doesn't seem right. So I think I have to study the US. And I didn't know what to do. And so I went overseas for a couple of years. I taught junior high. I loved teaching, but I found it a little boring teaching junior high. So I came back and did a master's degree in public policy at Rutgers at Blaustein. And they were sort of like, you should do a PhD. I had a lot of professors who kept telling me I should do a PhD. And I don't know what they saw in me. Now that I work with students, I see, like, I get it now. I'm like, oh yeah, I was on that track. I just didn't know the track I was on. And so people at Rutgers, I worked in education policy and I did science policy stuff. And the science policy professor I worked with kept saying, you know, we're studying policy, but you seem really interested in management. Like when we would look at like evaluating programs and how a policy was being implemented, I was always saying things like, yeah, but what about like the person who's doing that? Like they can change this as it's coming through, you know, the organization, or they can put in more or less effort. They can tweak a program to make it better. And he said, you know, I know you think you're interested in science policy, but I also think you're really interested in management. And the person who does science policy and management is Barry Bozeman. So you should go do a PhD with him. And I applied to go to Georgia Tech to study with Barry Bozeman because the professor I worked with at Rutgers told me to do it. I mean, I tried everything. Every time a professor said, you should do this, I was like, I'll try it. And I often would say things like, I don't think I want to do that. And they're like, well, go try. And so I really kind of picked up this, you know, I don't know exactly what I want to do, but if I try things, I'll figure out what I don't want to do. And so I did an internship at the National Academies of Sciences. I really enjoyed that. I thought I was going to go to the GAO. I interviewed with them. I got an offer. I got some offers with the Presidential Management Fellowship before I did the PhD, because I didn't know if I wanted to go into management or I wanted to do a PhD. So I thought, well, I'll just apply for both and see what happens. And then I got both and was like, well, now I have to decide, right? I got into all the PhD programs I applied to. I got a Presidential Management Fellowship. I got an offer from the GAO. I didn't really know what to do. And I thought, well, I'll go do the PhD, and if I don't like it, I can go back and go to the GAO. But if I go to the GAO, I'm probably not going to go to the PhD. So I just sort of made decisions based on what was the thing I was least likely to do again if I gave it up this time. And so I feel like I kind of fumbled into it. I worked with Barry at Georgia Tech. That was policy program. And in my second year, he got a job offer at Georgia. And he said, I'm going to move to the University of Georgia. And if you want, you can go with. And I was like, but I don't want a degree in public administration. I want to do public policy. And he was like, yeah, but if you stay here, there's no one else to work with. So I was like, well, maybe I should go to Georgia then. And so I transferred, and I ended up defending my dissertation at the University of Georgia, which was I think that's an unusual path for a PhD student.
Sure.
Yeah, I didn't feel like I was trained as a public administration scholar, but I have this public administration PhD. Obviously, I know a lot. Like, I learned a lot about public administration while in a policy program. And then UIC was hiring that year, and I have a lot of extended family in the Chicago area. My grandma was very old. She was like 90. I wanted to be closer to her in her final years. And UIC was this small program with people who did science policy, survey research, which I'd been trained on at Rutgers, and public administration, public management. And I was like, these are the three things I do. I should go there. And so UIC was a great place for me. It was a great place to be junior. I was really supported. I had such great colleagues. It was a wonderful place to be a junior faculty member. And I think that gave me a lot of space to start working on things I wanted to work on. And I had really good colleagues to work with, people who brought in science policy grants, and I would work with them on stuff. And it just really set me up. But I don't think I planned any of it. I just sort of kind of feel I fell into a lot of this.
Well, that's a remarkable story with so many great stops along the way.
Yeah.
You know, I'm struck though, probably the thing that I can't thinking as you were like, well, my professor said try this and my professor said try that. You've written some papers about, professors being mentors to students. So you at least had really good experiences or really bad experiences that helped you to think about how important that relationship was.
Yeah, I mean, my interest in mentoring, when I went to work with Barry, I went as a master's student. I visited the school after when I was applying, and we talked, and when he said, like, what are you interested in? And I was really interested in mentoring and science policy, mentoring of women in STEM. And so that was sort of the thing I was going to do my PhD on. And then I was also kind of building out this management interest, and that management interest became a lot more focused during my time in the PhD. So I transferred a lot of what I'd been learning about mentoring in STEM and mentoring of women in STEM to public nonprofit management for my dissertation. So, I was in a science policy program. I was doing science policy stuff. The funding I was getting was on science policy projects. And I was taking what I was some of the like theory and application about pipeline and training and the different types of mentoring and peer mentoring and all of that, and then applying that to public and nonprofit management.
So cool.
Yeah, and so then when I switched to Georgia, right, everyone there does public and nonprofit management, not the science policy. So I actually, at Georgia Tech, I was the only one really doing this public nonprofit stuff. Then I shifted to Georgia, and that fit really well. So it helped me with that transition. So it helped that I kind of had two interests, and I kind of draw from the two as I work. Like, I'm sure most of your listeners don't know anything about the science policy work I do. And I remember Barry saying that to me. He's really well known in the science policy field, but I think most PA people don't know that about him. But when you go to science policy conferences, people don't know he's really well known in the public administration field.
Yeah.
And so I had this mentor who worked in two areas and sort of said, you can do it. Like, you have to be strategic, and sometimes you have to put more effort into one or the other, but it's possible to do this and be successful. I was lucky to have a lot of mentors who saw something in me and made suggestions to me. I think I was always open to opportunities. I'm pretty like courageous and adventurous. So that kind of mentoring worked for me, but I had a lot of successful people saying, do this, try this, and I listened.
Yeah. You're clearly driven by the question, the research, right? That's what they saw in you. You weren't just doing it because that's what you were supposed to do, or, you had a set plan. You were saying, well, this is an interesting question. I should go pursue it wherever that takes me. Even teaching junior high. That's so cool.
Yeah, I think that's probably what, when I was a PhD student and on the job market as a junior faculty member, I think, Barry, I know, was writing to people like, she's a great teacher, and she listens and understands and like can control the classroom. Some of that comes from teaching, 13-year-old boys, but I really love teaching. I think as a kid, I always thought I'd be a teacher. In hindsight, that's probably because teachers were the only people I knew besides my mom, right, who were adults with jobs. And they were, teachers were from other places and they'd gone to college. They were the example I had of sort of doing something different. That might be why I wanted to be a teacher. I don't know.
That's great. So first job out, you're already hitting the ground running with great scholars and great folks around you, and these two really important research interests of yours. I don't, you could, not that you made it sound easy, but I tried this and I tried that, and it worked out for me. And people saw something. Obviously, it was hard work, especially probably those first couple of years out. So, um, for early career scholars today, what's some advice you have for them while you're sort of growing your research and being a good professor, being a good colleague? How do you do all that well?
I I see this sometimes with junior faculty, or when my PhD students go out and be faculty, and especially when you start teaching, right, and remind them like your students aren't you, and I think sometimes you finish your PhD and you go start your job and you're like, you have this like super high bar for all your students, and you're like, they all have to get A's and they all have to work hard, and they're not you. Part of why you make it through a PhD program and get this job is because you're different from, like, not everyone does a PhD and not everyone gets to be in front of the classroom. And so I think in some ways that same transition you have to go back to, right, of like, my goals aren't everyone else's goals, is that you have to figure out what you want to do and sort of what kind of researcher you want to be, or what kind of professor you want to be, or what kind of teacher you want to be, or if you even want to be a professor. And it's not for everyone. And I think if you're not enjoying it, you're not going to enjoy it more later. So I was one of the only assistant professors at UIC. And so the senior faculty really they ran the department, they did all the service, but I went to faculty member meetings and said what I thought and asked for things and, contributed. I never felt like I didn't have a voice or I couldn't say what I thought I should say. And maybe that's because I'm a little oblivious to people thinking I should be quiet. Maybe I just ignore that, but I never felt like I had to, I don't know, do what they wanted or, follow some rules. I just was like excited to be there. I was excited about the teaching. I was excited about the research. And I liked writing. I like writing. I like doing research. I like collecting data. I like working with other people. So I tend to collaborate with a lot of people because I enjoy it. And I didn't feel like getting tenure was hard work. I know I worked hard. But I wasn't thinking about getting tenure. I was just thinking about all the things I got to do in my job and how great it was. And I just did my job and I did the work. I happen to enjoy the things that are required for getting tenure. I happen to be kind of good at the things that are required. So I remember going to conferences and talking to my peers who were freaking out about tenure. And I was sort of like, if you're this stressed about it, maybe you don't enjoy doing research, or maybe you don't enjoy writing, or maybe you don't enjoy teaching, and maybe you should do a different thing. Like if getting tenure or working towards tenure is a nightmare for you, what's it going to be like once you're tenured? Because you're still doing the same stuff. You're just doing like more of it with less time. Now you have to do all the like admin stuff on top of that. And like, it's just more of that stuff. And so I try to say that to my students sometimes, right? Is that you have to figure out what you want to do. And hopefully what you want to do is something you're good at and you enjoy. And if it's not, maybe you should do something else. I think there's a lot of ways to be really successful with a PhD, either, as a faculty member or not, but even as a research faculty member or a teaching faculty member or an administrator. But we're really lucky, right? We're in a field where our PhD trains us to do a lot of different kinds of things, and we can go get other kinds of jobs. I think if you have a PhD in English, right, you don't have a lot of opportunities the way you do with a PhD in policy or public administration. And so I try to sort of remind my students and junior faculty, right, you don't have to do this job. You could do any job. And we are lucky to be able to kind of use our PhD in a lot of different ways. And I think part of being successful is figuring out what you want to do and then pursuing that with some joy and a lot of hard work. But I think it's hard to find joy. I think if it's hard to work on things in a committed way if you don't get any joy out of it.
That's a really original viewpoint from my perspective of this podcast, of other interviews we've done. I think a lot of folks really reflect on the institution and what it means. And, these are the traditional benchmarks of success, and here's how you do those. To say there's lots of benchmarks for success inside and outside academia. Go enjoy yourself. That's really different. But then I think just totally reflects exactly what you've said in this conversation. I could have done that. I could have done that. I chose this. I liked that. This worked at that time. So it's really great. I'm going to say paradigm shift. I'm going to feel bad about saying it. It's not my favorite favorite sentence or phrase to use, but whoa, yeah, like if you don't like doing it, you can do something else.
I think especially with students, sometimes I'll have them in my office, and some of what you have to figure out is, am I stuck on this thing? Am I stuck on this paper? Am I unhappy with this class? Or do I not want to be in a PhD program, right? Those are different things. And I can't tell a student what they should do or what they want. But I can ask them things like, well, why are you doing this PhD? And what about this do you enjoy and what do you not enjoy? What are the parts that are easy for you to do? What are the parts that make you feel good about yourself? And maybe I think if there are more negative things than positive things, maybe you should think about doing something else. You don't have to do a PhD. Just because you started, you don't have to stay. You could go find something else. Or just because you do a PhD doesn't mean you have to use it. And I don't feel like I have worked in programs that tell PhD students they have to be professors. I don't feel like we tell our students they have to be at R1s, but I hear that a lot. So, right, especially if you're on Twitter, right? It's like, I don't know how real what I hear on Twitter is. And I think, well, I didn't feel that way. And then I think, well, maybe that was the message and I just wasn't getting it, or maybe I ignored it. But I say to the students a lot, like, this is your life and it's your career. It's not about what your advisor wants you to do or be. You have to figure out what you want to do. You're an adult. Find what you want to do and do it. But if you want to be here, these are some of the things you have to do to be successful here. And you don't have to be good at everything. And maybe knowing the things that you're good at, knowing your strengths and weaknesses, and then working on your weaknesses or supplementing them with, colleagues who are good at those things would be a good strategy for moving forward. But before I give you strategies for moving forward, let's figure out if this is really what you want to be doing. I think motivation is really key to success in the academy, right? Because you have all these you constantly have work. The work is never done. It's kind of always there. There's a lot of different routes you can take. There aren't always clear deadlines and targets, especially for students when you get after comps. It's just sort of this open space with very little, requirements. And so if you're not motivated, it will be hard to complete things. And I think, being a successful academic requires real internal motivation and some discipline and structure. And sometimes you have to make the structure for yourself. And that can be hard for a lot of people.
Absolutely. What great advice. The students at Arizona State University are very lucky to have you.
I'm sure they're so tired of hearing from me, but
it's not. I honestly think because some of the other messages are so drilled in, they're going to have to hear that message many, many times before they get it. So you go right ahead.
Well, I don't totally buy that these messages that you have to do it this way are really drilled in. I think some of that is like a reinforcing narrative. I've sat with junior faculty, at conferences who talk about like, well, you have to do this, or, and they reinforce, I think, poor messaging with each other. Sometimes I don't think it's always like there's something coming down from the top forcing this on people. There's a weird kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, we all maybe heard it somewhere, and then we get in a room and say it over and over again.
Yeah, or it becomes a way to sort of create an excuse for yourself or a barrier. And I think it's a way that sometimes we try to connect with other people, and then we actually kind of perpetuate these narratives that are negative. And it's also possible my colleagues say those things to students. Like, I don't say that. I don't feel like I send that message. Yeah. It's entirely possible that message is being sent to my students and I don't hear it. Yeah. Right? I mean, I'm not a student and I don't know what they really hear from other people. So it's possible that they're being told they have to be professors. I don't think they are, but I don't know.
I mean, I was told I can see a place and a time and a person and like, if you do this, then this is the expectation.
Yeah.
Was it reinforced daily? No, but probably cause who that person was in that time, that message stuck and others didn't. Because I'm sure lots of people told me to have fun, enjoy your life. Um, but I know you've mentioned too a couple times, like maybe I don't hear that one too. So I know, I'm like kind of interested, like, how do you tune out the noise? Like, what do you mean? Like, maybe people are saying it, but I'm not going to hear that. Like, what in you um,
Well,
enables you to do that? Because I think it's like an amazing skill. I'm not going to hear things that don't help me. But I
well,
don't know that everyone has it.
yeah, obviously I hear the things that don't help me, like the negative student comments in a teaching evaluation, or a colleague saying something offensive or sexist or inappropriate, and it hurts and it grinds you, and you hear it again and again as you lay in bed at night, and you have to like get past it, right, and try to focus on the positive things. But I do think, one of the things I say to students is that one of the things you have to develop as a PhD student, and then I think as a junior faculty member, and then as a more senior faculty member, because I'm still working on this, is you have to ask for advice, you have to ask for help. You kind of have to know who to ask, right? And you have to take certain questions to certain kinds of people, right? If you want to know about how to be successful at publishing, probably you should talk to people who are good at publishing. If you want to talk, you have colleagues that are good teachers. You have colleagues that are successful at grant getting. So you should be selectively asking the appropriate questions to the appropriate people. But what I say to students, right, is you're going to get a lot of advice from people. And it's often all well-meaning. It's often all true for that person and for their experience. But you have to figure out what's right for you. And some advice isn't going to work for you. And I've said to students, well, they say, this is what I'm going to do. And I'll say, well, that's a really hard path. And I might outline for them, this is the more typical easy path. These are the reasons why this path would be easier for you. But, if this is what you really want to do, I'll support you and I'll help you out how you can. But, it's going to be really hard and it's going to be more work. And, sometimes they do it and they do it really well. And then they get really big payoffs for it. Sometimes they don't, right? But they have to choose. It's not my career. I have a PhD already. Whether they get a PhD or not is up to them. And if a student doesn't want to be in the program and complete their PhD, it's their life, it's their choice. It's not my PhD. And I think it's the same for junior faculty. If they want to, here's the easier way to tenure, you want to do it that way, good for you, good luck. But, that might be a lot harder. And they might have huge payoffs, right? And they might be way happier doing that, whether the payoff is high or low. And that's their choice. And so I think you have to be good at taking advice. You have to be good at filtering through, like, well, that's good advice, but I'm not going to do it. Or that's bad advice. I'm not going to do it.
Right.
And I think, we talk a lot about critical thinking, and then people don't always use their critical thinking skills when seeking career advice.
Yeah. We talk a lot about filtering information.
Yeah.
But will we do it when it comes to ourselves? Probably not. More often than not. Also really cool advice. So you're building on your career, over 50 published articles, over 2 books. You mentioned that you like writing, you like doing research, and you like collaborating with folks. Can you just talk a little bit about not just your research process, but how you've collaborated to get to define your research agenda?
Yeah. So I would say I didn't think about that.
I love it.
I give this advice to junior people and I say, well, this is what I did. It may not be advisable, but I worked on stuff that was interesting to me. So when I got to UIC, Eric Welch was there, and he does a lot of science policy, and we would talk about stuff, or he'd have a grant and say, do you want to do some work on this? And if it was interesting to me, I would say yes. If it wasn't, I would say no. And so we just kind of started working on things and working with students. I wasn't working with my PhD advisor as much. I had published a lot with Barry Bozeman, and as a student, and maybe my first or second year on faculty. And I had been warned, you don't want to look like you can't work without him, or his research is yours. And so, I thought a little bit about my own identity, but it just sort of happened. I started working with other people. Early on, I worked with peers and senior people. So I wrote with a couple people near my cohort, like Stephanie Moulton. I had a paper with Leisha DeHart Davis. She was probably 5 or 6 years ahead of me. I wrote with Craig Boardman. We were in a PhD program together. And then I wrote with some of the senior faculty at UIC, and I worked with them. And there was a survey research center there. So I got really involved with the faculty that run that. And so I worked with some of the students through that center, and then the science policy folks, and just worked on stuff. And I didn't think about, like, what's my portfolio look like. Sometimes I'll get PhD students now who talk a lot about their research identity in their portfolio. And I'm like, you're like 2 years into a program. Like, you should have interests, but like, you're not going to have this like strong identity portfolio just yet. And I think if you, as a junior faculty member, if you're thinking too much about identity and portfolio, you're not kind of doing what you want. Ideally, if you're doing what you want, that would build a portfolio. And so I was just kind of always doing what I wanted. And then at, third year review, I had to write an essay about my research focus, right? And I was like, oh, geez, I don't know how to do this. So I had to like look at all my papers and be like, what's the common theme here? And what am I doing? And then when I went up for tenure, I had to do the same thing. And it was there, but I wasn't very intentional about it. And fortunately, things did fit together. They fit in these sort of kind of big buckets of public and nonprofit management. I was doing a lot of sector comparison stuff. And then I was doing some science policy stuff. And some of the women in science was transferring into this sort of interest of women in management and government, right? So this sort of overlap there. And I don't know, it just kind of happened. At some point, I was nominated for an award or something. I didn't get. But the people who nominated me, it was like 2 of my colleagues at UIC and my PhD advisor, and they wrote a cover letter about me. And they sent it to me after they've nominated me. And that thing was so helpful to me because it was like these 3 senior people wrote about me and like wrote what buckets I was working in and what my contribution was. And I like used that for my tenure letter because I was like, oh, this is a really good outline of what I do. I'm gonna use this as a draft, as a framework to write out my P&T letter, because it was, I don't know, I think I didn't know what impact I was having, because how would I know? And it wasn't what I was thinking about. And later, when I got tenure, I'd be at conferences and people who'd never talked to me would come up and be like, how are you doing? And they'd start talking to me about my research, and I'd be like, how do they know all this about my work? It's like, again, like, this was one of my reviewers, because in Illinois, the whole P&T process was very black box. I had no idea who had reviewed me. And like 2 people revealed this to me, and others came and talked to me. And that, I don't think I understood that when you went up for tenure, 10 bigwigs in the field looked at your stuff and thought about your stuff and thought about your impact, and that might result in being invited to do things, right? And it would raise people's sort of knowledge about your work and awareness of your work. I probably sound like the most naive junior faculty member on the planet, but
no,
I wasn't thinking about strategy. I don't know why. I know I was strategic in the sense of like the day-to-day immediate decisions. I was thinking about strategy. Where do I send this? How do I do this? Should I work on this project? What will I get out of this project? If I commit to doing this grant, how much work will it be? When will I have data? Should I write with students, or is that going to slow me down? I thought about all of those things and made decisions, on those things, but I wasn't thinking about the big picture and the tenure. Because I sort of thought, if this place doesn't want to give me tenure, I don't really want to be here, right? Like when people talk about, oh, what if I don't get tenure? I sort of think, well, do you want a job in a place where more than half the faculty didn't vote to keep you? I don't want to go work in that place, you know? So I just saw it as like, if I do my job and I do my job well and my colleagues want to keep me, they will. And if they don't, I'll go somewhere else because I'd be better off somewhere else.
What you're saying doesn't sound like the opposite of strategy. It's just a strategy that I don't think a lot of people adopt in this field, right? You're saying you're driven by research and inquiry, and that was a cool question, and I had value here. So you were doing things, you were making strategic decisions, but you weren't making them from the standpoint of, I want to be at an R1 university doing research in a way that like we said before, a lot of folks, even if it's not a very clear message, are getting the message that that's what's important and not, oh my gosh, this is a really important question I want to answer. So it's not that it sounds like an absence of strategy. It's just a strategy that probably I know a lot of my colleagues, maybe a lot of your colleagues don't adopt.
I mean, it might be because I don't give a crap about pedigree. I don't think professors are like bigwigs. I don't think being a professor is a big deal. I don't think getting tenure matters to like your value. So, and this might just be because of the way I grew up or because I didn't, going to college was a way out. And it was also like, I was really interested in the world and seeing things and doing things. It wasn't about like status, and being a professor has never been about status for me. Being promoted was not getting tenure. Like, I don't need tenure. Like I'd like to have a job that I enjoy and that I'm good at and that I get paid for. But like getting tenure is not like some dream I held as a child, right? Or being a professor is not a dream I held. So maybe it's just that I don't buy into sort of you have to be at an R1. Who cares if you're at an R1? People outside of like this small circle of academics on Twitter don't even know what an R1 is, right? Being at an R1 is meaningless to like the social fabric of America, right? So who cares? And I'm not, super into, I don't need to be, I teach at big state universities because I believe in big state universities. Big state university is what got me out of taking care of all my little brothers and staying in Casper, Wyoming, So going to the University of Wyoming, to this place that I was like, this isn't a prestigious college. And, I thought I could go to a big fancy school, but because I don't have money, I can't go to Harvard. Like, I didn't know that I was supposed to fill out a FAFSA when I went to college. I never filled out a FAFSA. I worked all summer and during the school year and paid all my bills and had scholarships. Like, I didn't know people took out loans to go to college. I thought you just went where you could afford to go. I was not prepared to go to college. I was just excited to be there. And I think, and then there were all these things you could do. The university had all these like free scholarships. Like, they would pay for me to go to another university for a year and take graduate courses. That was just incredible to me. So, and when I get students here at ASU, I give this like little freshman lecture. I'm like, there are so many resources at this university for students. Mm-hmm. There's so much support and there's so many opportunities. You just got to go like sign up for it. And you know what? Nobody signs up for that stuff. So you don't have to be the best. You just have to fill out the form. And you can, have all these opportunities. And I really, I believe in that about these big state universities. There's so much opportunity for young people to find what they want to do or what they don't want to do. And that excites me a lot more than having tenure or being promoted.
I have all my undergrad students have to go to co-curriculars, and then they just have to write, like, what did I learn at this experience that relates to this class? And I get 100 emails. Well, what do you mean as it relates to this class? And I'm like, You tell me. Just go somewhere and do something. I'm sure you'll learn something. But they don't even know to go. But it's why we have universities, not
Well,
just
so if we're off
things.
topic here, I walked out of the building the other, like 2 years ago, and I ran into someone I know, like in my private life, and I was like, "What are you doing here?" And she's like, "Oh, I'm an adjunct at the Cronkite Journalism School." So we're chit chatting, and the student there, I didn't recognize the student. She was like, "Oh, Dr. Feeney." She's like, "I can't believe this. These are my two favorite professors," and I'm looking at her like, "I know you were an undergrad in my freshman class, but I don't know, like." I don't remember your name or anything. And she turned to the other teacher and says, it was my first year here. And Dr. Feeney was like, there was some program for like some government program in Puerto Rico with like the Science and Technology Institute or something that the feds had. And I sent it to the student and I was like, you should apply to do this, because she was a little bit interested in science policy. And she was like, oh, I'm not qualified for that. And I said, well, one, you are. But two, don't worry about that. Nobody applies for these things. You'll totally get it. I'll help you with your application. And she got it and she went and she got super interested in science communication, finished there and came back, did a bunch of other stuff here in science communication, and then decided to do a graduate degree over there at the Cronkite School. And she was like, this is why I'm in the program, the master's program over here, was because she sent me to Puerto Rico on this internship. I do not remember having that conversation with her, but it reminded me like, oh, sometimes they listen, you know. I could be what Bob Schumann was for me at the University of Wyoming. He was just constantly like, come to my office. I think you should apply for this thing. I'd be like, I don't think I'll get it.
That's it. You're right. Those are the moments you remember, not
Not who reads my paper and
not
stuff.
like a high impact article, right?
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, we are gonna get into becoming the editor of JPAR.
Sure.
Okay, so after a really great career, you are, I assume, asked to be the editor of the Journal of Public Administration Research and Theory, maybe not. So I'm kind of interested in how you came to hold that role.
So I was asked to apply, and I told them no. I didn't envision myself as a journal editor, really, at all. But I think maybe a year or two after I was tenured, I was at something, right? I was at this conference or something, and all the editors on the panel were male, and it wasn't just that they were men that it struck me, but these were the same editors of these journals, as when I was a PhD student. And I was like, that's really strange to me. Like, what goes on with these editorships and what's the turnover like? And so I started kind of looking into it and thinking about it and thinking about all the papers I send out and all the like rejections I get or R&Rs or the review requests. And like all those emails are signed by, these 5 or 6 men that I just, when you're junior and you're sending a lot of papers out, it's a lot of journal correspondence. And I thought back on my entire career and I realized Carolyn Heinrich was the only female editor I had ever had an interaction with. So I'd been submitting to JPART when Craig Thomas was the editor and Carolyn and Brad. But all the other journals in our field were run by men the entire time I had been in the field, right? So 7 or 8 years. I guess 10, counting when I was a PhD student, right? So in all that time, only one woman had ever been in that correspondence with me. And I thought about it a lot. And then I started reading up about it. And I started reading, and then I started looking into the history of some of the journals in PI. And I wrote this kind of I wrote this essay about the importance of sort of female representation in editorships and what was going on in the field. And then I interviewed some of the senior women in the field about why they weren't editors or why they did do editorships. And some of them had said like, oh, I was asked to, but I couldn't that year because of X, Y, and Z. And then they were never considered again. So I started to sort of see, well, it's not like that the women were never included or they were never considered, but the process was just a little different. And so I wrote this thing and I sent it around, and a few people were like, you should publish this. And I was like, well, it's not really research. It's not like a publishable paper. And so I was invited to do like a discussion session at PMRC in Minnesota with the paper. And so I posted it on like SSRN and I asked a bunch of people to read it. And we had a panel where we invited people to come talk about the paper. And in hindsight, I should have presented the paper, like the highlights of it at that session. I didn't, because I just thought everyone read the paper. I don't know why I thought that. But we went into this room and it was packed. It was like standing room only. And there were a lot of people there. And there was this editors panel. And there were a lot of like younger female academic participants at the session who were like really riled up and saying things that were in my paper, but like saying it with emotion and like, this just isn't right. And their representation matters. And there were younger faculty like me saying, you know, I've never gotten a letter from a female editor, you know, my entire career, and that's not okay. So this was people like 2 or 3 years behind me. And I left that session and thought, well, what do I do now? And should I publish this paper, or what can I do to change things? And I thought, I don't really want to be an editor, but like, if I want this to change, women have to go be editors, right? Somebody has to step up and do it. I didn't think I was qualified. I was like a first or second year associate. And I just sort of left it. I was later approached by a journal, but I didn't really have the resources to take on an editorship, so I didn't apply. And then Kelly LaRue and I decided to apply for the editorship at ARPA when it became available. And I thought we put together a very great proposal, and we had this big plan. I really wanted to edit ARPA because I thought we could have a lot of autonomy to expand it a little bit. It had been really improving in impact factor under the previous editors, and we wanted to sort of take it to the next level. We had this great idea, and we were rejected. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess we're not going to do that. I just sort of left it. And people knew we had applied and been rejected. So I think when JPART came up, I'd been really active at PMRA. I'd been on the board. I attend PMRC every other year. I'm active in that community. I was also one of the more published authors in the journal, especially for a more recent female author. And they had asked me if I would apply for the editorship. And I just sort of was like, well, you know, I'm not really interested in editing JPART. It has this it's this top journal. It has this really high reputation. I don't think there's a lot of opportunity to implement change because people have a lot of expectations for that journal and they're not going to want change. And I think it's a lot of pressure to take on the top journal because all you're going to do is screw it up and then everyone's going to be mad at you. So I was like, no, I don't want to take up on the top journal in the field and then be blamed for any failure that happens there. Also, they had done some funny things a couple years earlier with the journal. They had expanded the page numbers and gobbled up all the online backlog. And so they were anticipating a bit of a crash in the impact factor. And I knew this because I was on the board, the PMRA board, not the editorial board, though I was probably on the editorial board too. And so I was like, I don't want to take on the top journal in the field knowing that the impact factor is going to plummet the year I take it. Which was no fault of mine, but people don't understand how impact factors work and I would be blamed for it. So I was like, yeah, thanks, no thanks. And they kept on me a little bit about applying. And so I talked to all the former editors and they were really honest about the downsides of being an editor. And some of the upsides, but it seemed like there were a lot more down than there were a lot more reasons not to do it than to do it. And then I thought a lot about how I can't complain that there's no women running journals, and then when I'm asked to apply, not do it, right? Because that doesn't align with my value set. Like if I want this to change, maybe I have to do it, even though I don't really want to do it. And then I thought, well, maybe I do want to do it. And so I was back and forth. And Craig had said to me, one of his issues with running JPART was he was an associate. Carolyn, I think all three of them, Brad, Carolyn, and Craig, maybe all were associates when they took on the journal and then were promoted. while editor or after. But Craig said, running that journal really delayed my promotion to full. It sidetracked me. It took up a lot of time. So you should wait till you're full, or you should really think about that, or you should have a plan. And that was not something I was thinking about. And so I thought, well, here's what I'll do. I'll apply to edit JPART and I'll put in for full and we'll see what happens. So I was like, and if I don't get JPART, it'll be a relief. And, maybe I'll get full. And if I don't get full, then I'll just spend all my time running JPART and it won't matter. So I just kind of threw it out there. And then I got both. So that worked out for me.
Congrats.
I don't know. I think association run journals, right? They have to do a lot of work soliciting applications, because for a journal like JPART, my institution provides my support to do JPART. Like they pay for my time. And I'm at a place that was excited about me applying to be the editor of JPART. My director is really happy about it. He thinks it's good for the field and the program and me. He's like, this will be really good for your career. This puts you in a great position. I don't think many directors or deans think that way about journals. So I was kind of in the right place at the right time.
I love this idea too of like, do I want to be a part of this? Realizing that inertia is what it is. You couldn't change that. But what does matter and what matters more, right? Your value, the conversation you initiated about women editors was more important than, hey, should this be the traditional journal everyone thinks it is? And I mean, I don't know, I'm kind of interested. Do you feel that it remains the journal everyone expected it to, or are you doing new things that you think are the right fit for it?
That's an interesting question. I think my application for the journal was like, my number one goal is to keep JPART on its trajectory with its, strong reputation in the field. Because that is it's not maybe my personal number one goal, but that is the job, right? JPART belongs to PMRA. And JPART is the premier journal of the association. And you have a responsibility to the association to run the journal as the association envisions it, right? So I mean, theoretically, I could hijack the journal and do something different. They could fire me, but I could do a lot of stuff before they fired me, probably. But I have, it's a responsibility to the association. And I recognize that it is not my journal. It is the association's journal. Brad and I talked a lot about how during the transition, how JPART's really known for not having bumpy transitions, right? The editor changes, the journal doesn't. There aren't editorials. It's not like my journal and what Mary's done to it, or what Brad did to it, or what Craig did to it. It's the association's journal. The editor is running it. And I don't know, I don't think that all journals in our field run that way. But we talked a lot about that, and how it doesn't mean you can't have impact and change things, but also, the journal is the association's baby. So my proposal was number one goal, keep it on track, help it get over this incoming collapse and impact factor that we know is going to happen, push it through that, build a backlog, deal with some of the technical things that are going on at the journal that we see happening. And then secondarily, I sort of had a proposal about expanding what we mean about rigorous research that advances theory. So JPART is a journal focused on theory advancement, right? Most journals in our field are not, or even if they are focused on theory, they are also focused on practice. And JPART is not a practice journal. And I have no interest in changing that. We have lots of places we can send our practice papers. So I don't think that JPART needs to fulfill all missions, But I think that there was a feeling in the community that JPART had become too narrow methodologically and maybe topic-wise. I think some of that's also just how people make excuses for not publishing in the journal. There's a two-way street there, right? Some of it's this is my excuse, and some of it's maybe true about the journal. And so I talked a lot about expanding sort of what we mean about rigor and theory advancement and public administration, because I think public administration is becoming a bigger tent, and that is important. It's more like public service, not just public administration. And so I wanted to make some of those, I guess you would say, kind of qualitative changes without hurting the journal's reputation and trajectory. And I spent a lot of time thinking about how to do that. And I felt like it didn't need to be a big statement. It didn't need to be a new section. It needed to be how we made decisions and how we ran the process. And so I have made a lot of changes sort of in the back end that I think submitting authors and people who publish in the journal and reviewers experience, maybe. And maybe they don't. But I've heard people say the journal has really changed. I don't feel like it has. I think some of that's like the perceptions of the journal have changed a bit. I don't know that it's changed. It's very hard for me to assess because I'm like in it.
I like that idea that we can have women editors and still uphold the quality that you've come to expect from this journal. Like, not all women are just gonna, be crazy.
I don't think anyone thought that putting me in charge of JPART was going to ruin the quality of the journal. But I did, I was at a conference after I'd submitted my application, and I had a very well-known young colleague. We were all talking about JPART's going to get a new editor, and they were like, do you all know who applied? And someone said, oh, I know this group applied. And a guy said, well, you applied, didn't you? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, you're going to get it because they have to give it to a woman. And the two guys that were standing with me just sort of like slinked away because I think they could just see me, like the steam was probably just coming out of my ears. And I kind of laid into that guy.
Good for you. I think that's the stereotype, that somehow, not even just being a woman, but that change.
It was just checking a box. That's why I was made the editor. And I know that's not true. And I know that most of my colleagues don't think that. But when someone says that to you, it's really hard not to. I was just like, oh, why even bother? Like, now I'm going to do all this work. Like, now I'm going to like take stuff like that and then I'll do all the work. It was sort of like, I wanted to pull the application. I wanted to just walk away. I was so hurt by this person who's not like my close friend or anything. But it was just one person. It's like that one negative teaching evaluation you get where you're just like, I know this isn't like the universe and I shouldn't center myself on this, but it still just stings.
And you still have a really hard job ahead of you that you didn't need to do. Like, you're doing public service, and like,
it is service. Yeah. When people complain to me, it takes everything I have not to just be like, I don't get paid to do this, right? Like, I'm helping you out here.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's hard work and it's important, and there should be a journal that is advancing theory in this field, and like, someone's got to do it. Yeah.
But I think it's now that I do it, it is a really important job. And, Brad was right. He told me, like, you will just learn so much about the field because you're seeing everything. I've learned so many people's names and where they are and what they do. And I have skimmed so many papers I would never normally look at. I know like what junior people are working on. I know what students are putting out. I know kind of what the methods are looking like. It really gives you a view of the field that is so different than just being a faculty member. And it's overwhelming. But that is a really interesting place to be. It is also, I don't think that I'm important and I have power, but it is a position where you could really abuse your power. You could really abuse the system. You could do a lot of favors for people. You could do a lot of nasty things to people. And I think, we have to take really seriously these choices about who we put in charge of our journals, because it is a position that requires a lot of responsibility and thought. I'm in my third year, and I think I can't do this for much longer because you have to check your bias like all day long. Everything is like, am I being fair? Am I being biased? Like, can I make this decision? And like check and double check, and being hyper alert to that is really tiring. Doing this job well takes a lot of energy. And I don't think I could do it well for 7, 8 years, let alone, 15. It would just be, I think you need a break, and other people need to do it. But I think it's a really important position. It is really important that we have thoughtful, fair people running journals, because I just think there's a lot of opportunity for abuse.
Right. You have to see the future of science and know it when you see it, and that's hard. I also have to think it probably feels really like important due to your interest in science policy. So like now you are the gatekeeper of science policy.
I mean, I don't feel like a gatekeeper, but I know I am, right? It's strange, but it's about, I don't feel like, sometimes what I'm doing is I'm adjudicating this sort of disagreement, right? So are the reviewers and the authors in disagreement, but they're not necessarily wrong, right? They can both be right.
Mm-hmm.
They can both be wrong. One of them can be very wrong and the other is very right. So it's a lot of spending time sort of figuring out who's right here, or and then how do I decide and where do I land? It's a lot of, judgment. So I'm not the reviewer. I'm not the expert in the sort of content or the method or the context, or, whatever is going on in the paper might not be in my area, but I still have to adjudicate the sort of decision, right? And assess people's argumentation and their evidence, and are they being fair, and am I being fair in the choice? And I think if I really don't know, often I go to my team, right? And we do like a blind sort of decision. I'll bring in more people. But then sometimes it's like, well, I like to default in favor of the author in that case, because I think the costs of siding with the reviewer and penalizing the author are larger than inappropriately siding with the author, to please the reviewer. You have to keep reviewers in the system. You can't constantly override them. You have to keep them kind of happy. But if I'm going to make a mistake, I'd rather make a mistake in favor of the author. I am going to publish papers at JPART that aren't great, or that maybe shouldn't have made it through. I think that's better than rejecting really great papers that we should have given a chance. There's no cost to me if we publish some bad paper in the journal and no one cites it. Really, oh well, the marketplace of ideas will determine the value of that paper once it's published.
Isn't that a great point to end on? I want to thank you so much for this conversation, for your time. I think what you shared today is really valuable, and I look forward to having other people hear it. And I look forward to, I enjoyed getting to know you better. I thought that was really interesting. So thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. This has been my pleasure.